It's Saturday, May 20th, around 3 o'clock, outside 7 Mile Casino, ready to get a session in. Alright, I'm back, 7 hours later, and time to go over some hands. I'm giving a new hand replayer a shot in this episode, Share My Pair. It was recommended to me by Chula Park, so make sure and blame him if you don't like it. I personally like it much better though. That's me in seat 7, Poker Statistician, dealt pocket jacks in the small blind. It gets folded to the button who limps in. Somewhat lucky for me because much of the time the button would just fold this hand if it's that weak to limp, and the big blind and I would chop the pot. I make the easy raise, sizing it up to 20. The big blind has called preflop basically every hand in the first 2 rounds while I've been at the table, and the button has also been quite active. They both characteristically call, with what I'm assuming are pretty wide ranges. The flop brings me top set on a very coordinated board. I bet out $40, about a 3/4 size pot bet after the rake. The loose calling station calls, and the young action player folds. Not putting the caller on anything special, and since he has less than a pot size bet left, I'm planning to put him all in on any turn card. Besides pairing the board, an offsuit deuce is the absolute best card for my hand. I put out $120 thinking I put him all in. He actually says, I call, and quickly turns over Queen 10 offsuit, leaving $2 behind. He has 8 outs. One of them comes on the river, giving him a straight, and I lose. I do save the $2 there, though, with him turning over his hand prematurely, but I have to add on 200 more, making me in for 500. The hand was very straightforward on my end, nothing to talk about. It just shows how I got down early in the session, and how much action is being given at this table. Calling almost a pot-size all-in bet with only 1 card left to draw for a straight. My table is looking pretty great right now. After folding for the next round, I pick up bullets on the button. 2 limps ahead of me, and I put in the raise to 20. Getting the loose station to call and the small blind to my direct left. Then the big blind rips in his short stack, all in, 115. Things are developing quite nicely for me, with the action getting back to me, with only the small blind left behind me. Against a typical thinking opponent, I would just jam myself in this spot, thinking just calling looks even stronger, because it's just begging the small blind to come in. But with this specific opponent, I want to make it as enticing as possible, wanting to have him think he has such good odds on a call. So I decide on a call, and the small blind does come along, and a huge pot is brewing. A raise would have most likely gotten him to fold, so calling seems to me like clearly the best play for this opponent. The flop comes all low cards, and the small blind checks. I can't really put this villain on a specific range, but he has less than a pot-sized bet left that could call this flop with many possible hands in the spot, at least I think. Any pair I would expect to call, maybe even 2 overs, who knows. Those hands might fold to a bad turn card, so I put them all in for real this time. Then he quickly folds. The board brings 2 more low cards. I should almost always be good against the big blind. He is already shaking his head when I start flipping over my hand. He mucks after he sees my aces. I essentially get my bunny back from the pocket jack's hand, now just with a little over $500 in front of me. There's an under the gun straddle in this hand, 2 limps from early/middle position, and a button limp as well. With ace-jack in the small blind, I would decide to raise depending on the player pool and what hands they would be limping with. I've already seen the first limper limp in with 3 deuce suited, and the button with queen 8 offsuit. so I know I'm way ahead of their ranges. The pot already has $30 in there that I would expect to pick up uncontested most of the time. Then if the straddler goes all in, I shouldn't be in bad shape and can comfortably make the call of only $60 more. I call the straddler flops because he seems like he really wants to see the flop, so he could go all in somewhat light. Raising might not get too many weaker hands to call, even from that player and all the other players, but seeing ace-jack offsuit in a six-way pot totally out of position does not seem like a good way to play this hand. So I put in a raise to $50. I could have limped along with the intent of keeping weaker aces in the pot, but I think the amount of money already in the pot makes raising the better option. Everyone folds, and I do end up taking down the pot without even seeing a flop. Here we have the under the gun straddle on again by flops, and the dealer puts in a min raise to 12. I make the standard call after the small blind calls, looking to hit a set in this multi-way pot once the straddler likely calls. I do see a third 3 come on the flop. Everyone checks to the button raiser, and he puts out a tiny bet of $15. Easy raise, I think. Only the straddler is left to act, and I really want to start building this pot against the deep stack button, who I call face up, since he has somewhat played his hands face up so far, being pretty easy to read. I don't want to just call and have a tough time getting a huge pot going out of position, but then flops, quickly goes all in for the rest of his chips. The button folds kind of begrudgingly, then I of course make the easy call once the action's back on me. In this specific situation, it looks like it could have worked out really well for me if I just called the $15 bet, because the straddler would have had a chance to raise all in bigger, and the button would have a chance to overplay his hand, thinking my money's kind of like dead money in there. I don't want to be results oriented though. With flops, range being so wide, just calling the min raise from the straddle, most of the time he should miss the flop and just fold. Overall, raising does seem like the right play on this draw heavy of a board. I end up filling up on the turn, which turned out to be crucial because flops hit a straight on the river, showing Jack 9 for an up and down straight draw, excitingly showing, thinking that he had won the hand. I almost hit a set on the flop and lose to a straight draw once again, but a full house beats a straight, and I chip up to about $700. Here I pick up Jack 9 of hearts in the big blind, and face a raise to 16 with about a full stack from 3 deuce suited, and 2 callers with pretty short stacks. I'm for sure putting the original raiser on a premium hand, since this is the first time he has raised during the session, and has been very limp happy. With this hand, I am really only looking to hit 2 pair plus, or a strong draw, not just a 1 pair type hand, which I think it will do enough for the time to warrant a call, because it's such a great drawing hand. Playing out of position to a pretty large raise with 2 of the players having shallower stacks could make a tight fold here a possibility, but getting 4-1 odds on a call closing the action, Jack 9 suited seems worth it to take a flop, so I call for the $13 more. Fabulous decision by me. I get rewarded by my amazing play with top 2 pair. I check after the young action player in the small blind checks, then the preflop raiser puts out a pretty small bet of 27, and gets min raised to 55 by a player that I haven't seen get out of line anywhere, with only $74 left remaining. Since he has so little left, I'm not at all worried about getting it all in against him. I wouldn't lose him as a customer. I'm only thinking about the best way to get 3 deuce suited's money. So should I raise or cold call in this spot? I'm mostly targeting how to get an overpair's money with pocket queens, kings, or aces. There are only 4 combos of strong draws of king, queen, ace, jack, ace, queen, and ace, king of diamonds. This player seems so limp happy that he wouldn't open raise with weaker starting hands that ended up to be weaker draws than those. Then 18 combos of overpairs. So drastically more of those. The original bet, as well as the raise, are so small relative to the pot. Cold calling would give a great price of overpairs to hit their set, or pair the 5 to get a higher 2 pair than me. Calling and having this villain call could also possibly get him away from his overpair if a diamond came, and I wouldn't want that. The positives of cold calling, though, would give the action back to the original raiser, giving him the opportunity to think something like his pocket aces are good, and he would raise himself. But he seems somewhat of a timid player, and I don't think he would raise with just a pair here, and he would just call getting that price. Cold calling could easily be the better option, because I'm not too worried about the deeper stack having a flush draw. Still not close to sure on the best line to take, though, in this spot. I decided on the raising route, putting the flop raiser all in, with 3-2 suited folding. He later claimed that he had an overpair when I asked him. I'd rather have had him be in the hand with me. Even though I'm ahead of his specific hand of an overpair, that hand is still 3-1 to win by the river, so it's still not a horrible loss him folding there and not being able to draw so cheaply in position against me. The action gets back to the flop raiser, who begrudgingly calls, saying, "Is top pair good?" I really like the sound of that, and don't see any high cards come on the turn or river for a possible higher 2-pair suckout. He shows ace-jack offsuit for top pair top kicker, and I chip up to just under $900. That was the highest point I was at during my session. I raised a few hands after this, but folded most of the time on the flop for about another hour or so. Nothing too noteworthy, losing about $100 in the process, cashing out for $787. I was in for 500, which makes this session up 287 over 7 hours. It was a great action table throughout. A few of the weaker, looser players had left, though, by the end, and I felt it was about time for me to call it a night. This was not the most interesting episode, to say the least, with many of the hands simply playing themselves out. I was waiting for good starting hands, being patient, and getting value from weaker holdings. Just another session playing low-stakes live poker.